is the solution to recover these gender worlds to return to 1950s gender roles? Or is it maybe a lot more fundamental than that?
No, yeah, definitely not the 1950s. I mean, there's a lot of good there, of course. There's always good.
Yeah.
And you got to remember, when we talk about liberalism and worldviews, these ideologies, like they're always parasitic
Mhm.
on the human experience, which is fundamentally good. And so sometimes when people listen to these conversations, they can think like, oh, like gender's been irredeemably lost because we're all a bunch of satanic money grubbers. And it's like, that's true, but only to an extent. The truth is, we're all human and we all want the good, and we all talk to each other and we all make friends with each other, and we develop gendered worlds within our families, and then sort of by default. The point is that the ideological structures of modernity that oppress us need us to remain good enough in our humanity to have something to oppress. And that's what's really happening. It's not like the obliteration of gender out of existence. It's the continued production of just enough gender difference in order to
Have something to oppress. Yeah.
so in some ways it's more wicked, but it's also more hopeful, because the tyrant always needs something that's not tyrannical over which to be a tyrant.
Right.
That's sort of that's my like political philosophy caveat for optimism. But
Gotcha.
yeah, I don't think the 50s is the answer, because the 50s is really where you see what you might just call the conservative construction of gender working for a time. So what I mean is, by the 50s era, you did have the loss of gendered worlds. Largely, there's no more Catholic vision of distinct difference with distinct authority. But it feels very conservative. Why? Well, because the kinds of things that successfully produced man and woman are kinds of things that Catholics generally like. So Schindler talks about this a lot, where he looks around at modernity and he says, the problem is that you can do the same kinds of things for very different reasons. And the 50s was a time, 40s and 50s was a time where a lot of people were doing the same things as Christendom, but for very different reasons. I mean, one of the things that I always like to point to is, sometimes this might seem a little off topic, but sometimes people talk about the loss of mass attendance. People going to mass as if it were this kind of unique Catholic phenomenon, sort of maybe a product of the Vatican Council or something, Second Vatican Council or something like that. But anyone who's looked at the numbers sees that at the exact same time that mass participation is falling out, you have participation in every other kind of social or fraternal organization falling out. So it's falling out from the Masons, falling out from the philanthropic clubs, falling out from the sports leagues, falling out from, I mean, you name it, in America, we were losing it. So when you look at that data, what suggests itself is that prior to the fallout, people were going to mass for a very different reason than they were going to mass in, say, medieval Norway. Why? Because in order to fall out at the same degree as other social clubs, you kind of have to be living as if the mass and as if the faith is a social club. And when you look at the history prior to it, you see that is the case, that Christianity during the wars had been expressed as a kind of national reality, a way in which we were Americans, a way in which we weren't communists, a way in which we showed the goodness of our way of life, et cetera, so that when, as the Cold War dies down, as it becomes less relevant, then Christianity, which has been reconfigured as opposition to communism and atheism and everything bad, now it falls away. You know, with gender, you can see how in the kind of stereotype of the housewife, you have something a lot more like the anxiety of the trans person today, which is namely that this being of man and woman no longer has the enforcement and the depth of a gendered world behind it, right? Because there's no agricultural community, there's no well that women are getting water from, there's no center of authority where the woman actually speaks authoritatively about children, about childbirth, about certain works, and there's no cottage industry or a home economy in which the home is considered as a kind of dance of male and female worlds that keeps the family in being. That's all out the window. So now you have the meaning of man and woman no longer has this cultural liturgy with which to learn it. So now we have to learn it extrinsically, right? And when we, especially in America, but just generally, when we have to now learn a reality extrinsically, we tend to turn towards commodities to provide it for us. Okay, so what makes a woman a woman? Well, a woman becomes like the person that the advertisements say she is, right? So you've all seen these kind of old sexist advertisements, and we've all laughed at them. Like, how could people be so dumb as to think that, you know, a real woman uses this kind of blender, or, you know what I mean? Like these sort of,
Yeah.
which is hilarious, of course, because currently we exist in a world in which commodity production isn't simply suggested as the way in which to determine yourself as a man or woman. It isn't required. Like, you got to buy the hormones,
Yeah.
you know, you've got to perform facts. It's on the market now. I mean, you can describe the trans moment as a revolution if you want, but it sure seems a lot more like just another thing becoming a commodity. And
Mhm.
precisely in the same way that manhood and womanhood was becoming a commodity in the 50s and 60s. So, you know, to be a man, you have to wear this, you have to speak to your wife like that. I mean, this was the age where it was very popular for people to read instructionals on how to behave like a woman or how to behave like a man, where they
Mhm.
would, you know, this kind of real men do this, real women do that. And we can look back on that in the past and say, oh, well, wasn't it awesome? Didn't they have like a moral code to being a man and woman? Didn't they have like this kind of like ethical standards? But I think we would be mistaking the true sources of standard and norms and honor and shame. Like, if it's coming from a handbook and an advertisement, the world has already been lost.
Yes, yeah.
And again, I'm exaggerating to make the point. The point is not that all women in the 50s were just completely devoid of such character that they had to buy, you know,
Yeah.
turkey basters or whatever to make it work. But the point is, you can see that once gender has been stripped of receiving itself from the customary cultural life of a people,
Mhm.
that the turn to commodity production as a new source of affirming that one is a man, is a woman, that becomes possible for the first time.